Yeah.
I don't know if you were here when I was pitching various fundraising ideas to Andrea, but I realized thinking of doing the pod with Mikeie that Ultimate Frisbee tournament. We could do Nashville banner hosted Ultimate Frisbee. Well, this is easier than developing a game. Like, this is just like you get people in, you know. Okay, even easier idea to execute on. We sell Nashville banner Frisbees. Just Frisbees with the banner logo on them. Just as like a promotional thing. Anyway. Okay, it's just you were typing and made me feel...
I'm doing other things, but I'm ready.
This thing just runs itself?
Yeah.
All right. All right. Hey, everyone. Stephen Hale here from The Banner, here with my friend Mikeie, who's here to talk to us about courts and lawsuits and everything. But first, how you doing?
Good. Yeah. Thanks for having me back, Hale.
Thanks for coming back. We were just chatting about Frisbee-based sports, but we'll do that another time because you've got a story coming out. When people hear this, story should be published. It always makes me nervous to say that because in case something happens, but it should be online by the time people hear this, about this 3-year kind of legal saga that started when Roe v. Wade was overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court, and that triggered a Tennessee law that there's now been litigation over, and there's been many delays in. So that's what you've been covering.
Yeah. So there's supposed to be a 2-week non-jury bench trial, so just a 3-judge panel that would make the decision on this lawsuit in Chancery Court challenging the state's near total abortion ban. And the state had passed a bill during this last legislative session that just expanded when the state could appeal certain things. And they were able to appeal this motion for summary judgment. So just like a week or so before it was supposed to go to trial, they were able to appeal it, and that issue will get litigated for a year or two, probably. So the trial got removed from the docket.
Well, and so to emphasize what you're saying, so this lawsuit was initially filed in September 2023, right?
Yes.
So we're going on 3 years since the original law, and then the lawsuit challenging that law is passed. And a lot of what your story is about the delays that they've faced in getting this to trial. One thing I love about your writing and reporting is like you're covering courts for us, you're covering lawsuits, but it's always kind of, you always want to zoom in on the people in the middle of all this stuff, in the middle of the legal world. So tell me about Catherine Archer and her story.
Yeah. So Catherine actually joined the lawsuit later at an amended complaint stage, and she moved here in 2020 to go to grad school at Lipscomb. She wanted to be a counselor, a mental health professional. She already had a daughter, and I believe in 2022 they'd gotten pregnant. At this anatomy scan, 20 weeks in, they learned it was a girl. They were going to name her Cece, Cecilia. Their older daughter was super excited to be an older sister. Her husband rather was super excited to be a girl dad, which I believe you are, Hale.
Yes. Also, I was surprisingly moved in the opening of your story. You talk about them watching Daniel Tiger with their daughter, which I think is probably many parents have done, but it was a big part of our life too. But you mentioned they had their eldest daughter was almost 4. And then she was pregnant with another girl. Right.
So yeah, it went from super high to super low. Like at this anatomy scan, just super. They were 20 weeks. They were super excited to have a daughter, and then they learned, the doctor came out and just told them that, or the OB rather came out and told them that the baby just had some health challenges from head to toe, abnormalities, spina bifida, and just like. She went to the specialist the next day and confirmed the same thing. If they carried this baby to term, just a really high chance that the baby was going to die. And so Catherine, kind of reckoned with that. Had always wanted, to build a big family because of how she'd grown up, and decided she needed to get an abortion. But, couldn't get it here, couldn't get it from her medical team that she was comfortable with. So I think it took her almost a month, because there was such a long waiting list, to secure an appointment in Washington, D.C. And by that point, it had progressed to the point that she needed a 2-day procedure instead of a 1-day procedure. So she and her husband traveled to D.C. They had 2 friends. But one thing I was struck by just from interviewing her, she talked about how alone she felt throughout the process, even having a really supportive husband, really supportive family, but just like there are certain parts of it that, she just had to do it by herself. And she said that was just like bone deep loneliness that was completely unique that she'd never experienced before. And so that, yeah, and semi bittersweet ending. She was about a year or two after that, she was able to have a second son, but going through that pregnancy throughout the first trimester, second trimester, she was, kind of waiting for something tragic to happen, waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Sure. Yeah. So a couple of things there. I thought maybe we could talk through this in kind of sections the way you have in your story, talking about the women, the plaintiffs, and the women who have dealt with this issue themselves, and then kind of the providers, because it raises a lot of questions for them. But her story illustrates kind of the situation. So this law is passed, and there are some exemptions for when abortions can be allowed. But as you say, it was like, I think the wording is medical judgment, or it's vague. It's not clear, and so a lot of providers are uncertain. A lot of women are uncertain, and they were also uncertain whether in other states there had been laws or proposals to either criminally or civilly, be able to go after women who get abortions. So people were nervous about that, and I mean, we're two guys here talking about this, right. But I knew, we had friends who I know changed their life plans around the uncertainty about this, whether it was we're not going to maybe try to get pregnant, or if we do get pregnant, we're going to have plans in case something goes wrong. I say all that to say, you mentioned that she had to go to DC, so she had to leave the state to get this procedure because there was uncertainty about whether she could legally get it here. And part of that uncertainty continues because this lawsuit is still dragging on.
Yeah, and just that's correct. And anecdotally, a lot of my best friends from undergrad lived here, right after college, until I guess the point where they finished law school, med school, or whatever the next phase in their lives was. But I think all of them ended up moving to other states just because, I think partly because of this, partly because of other reasons, just because they wanted to live or raise children specifically in a different climate, when we were approaching that age. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, and this is maybe, I'm laughing because I feel almost silly saying this, but I do think it's worth maybe just saying, which is like, we are reading your story made me think of this. Watching my wife give birth to our kids made me think of this, which is that like pregnancy and childbirth and all these things, like we're advanced to the point where many people do this successfully and help, but it's like to use a medical term, wild process. It's dangerous. It's a real, and so even the best pregnancy, like there's all these risks. And so that comes up in your story of these women who are pregnant and they're kind of going to every appointment and wondering, is something going to be wrong that could risk their baby's life, but also their life, right? So to that point, I want to start off by talking about the plaintiffs, which I guess there are providers who are plaintiffs as well. But to start off by talking about the women who themselves were pregnant or were maybe going to become pregnant. There's a part in here where one of the lawyers tells you that one of these plaintiffs, it says, she mentioned a long conversation with one of the plaintiffs who asked if after she testified in the event of a trial, she would be led out of the court in handcuffs. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like some of these women, on top of all the anxiety that you would have about testifying in court and telling your personal story, they were very unsure about if there were some legal jeopardy they'd be in by even talking publicly about it.
Yeah. So I think one of the lawyers who I talked to one of the legal team, and I think one of her main arguments was that it's kind of the climate the ban's created in addition to the law itself. Because as it's written, you can't get a felony for getting an abortion, but the providers, the person who gives the abortion, the doctor can. And I think it's just like, a lot of that uncertainty and anxiety that's tough for if you're having a kid. Like Catherine Archer talked a lot about. She's a pro-abortion rights person. Had been nervous when Roe v. Wade was overturned when she got pregnant. And that was something that was kind of looming in her mind throughout the early parts of her pregnancy, but then the first trimester went perfectly. And so she kind of let it slip from her mind, but then it came back in a really, really major way. But yeah, I also, for the story, interviewed a provider, Dr. Laura Anderson.
Next on my list. So tell us about her.
Yeah. So she'd been an OB since 2002, and I think been local for a little under a decade. And yeah, she just talked about how when Roe v. Wade was overturned, she just everything changed. Just not knowing what you can treat, when you can treat, if someone records something or says something, if you're going to prison, if you do the wrong thing.
Let me cut in just to read this quote from
Yeah.
her because this, and then you elaborate on it. She said, she told you, chatting with different providers across the state, it's a theme that's repeated over and over again. What can I treat? When can I treat? How sick does this patient need to be before I can legally end this pregnancy without fear? And there's not an answer to that question. It comes down to how risk tolerant an individual is as a provider and how accepting their hospital is of that risk as well. And, you also mentioned in here that she had gotten an attorney to help her make sure that what she was putting in her charts was thorough enough or whatever to kind of protect herself and her patients and make sure that. So yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty on both sides of it.
Yeah, she said the particularly uncertain period was it was the stage between the ban going into effect and the First Amendment to it, which was the reasonable medical judgment amendment. But she said like during that period, she was really worried about just like anything I could do could send me to prison. But one of the, I guess in addition to the anxiety among providers, one interesting thing that she mentioned, and I guess this is backed up by data, a couple different outlets, is that she said that there's like fewer med school graduates applying to residency in OBGYN here in Tennessee, and just actually in all specialties. And so one of the knock-on effects she sees within a decade or so is in Tennessee and in, I guess, the 12 other states with kind of comprehensive bans, she thinks there's going to be like poor medical quality, just fewer qualified professionals.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that the issue in the legislative context gets debated as a very narrow, like, are you for or against abortion? Just like in a vacuum kind of or whatever. And as we've discussed, that in and of itself is much more complicated and nuanced. But what you're talking about is it's an overall women's health thing, right? Because if fewer people are coming here to be OBGYNs and stuff, that's care that's not even related to abortion that maybe they're getting less of, or women are getting less quality care or what have you. And I mean, gosh, you can even extend it out to sort of economic effect of fewer people want to come here and be doctors or be whatever. So yeah, that's a really interesting part of it.
Yeah, and I think the other element of the story is specifically the effect of the delays of the trial on the plaintiffs and I guess on Tennesseans as a whole. So, the lawyer, Alexandra Willingham, who's representing the plaintiffs.
And she's an attorney at the Center for Reproductive
Rights.
That's
right? Yeah.
Reproductive rights, yeah.
Yeah, had some pretty scathing quotes about the state. Just saying stuff like Tennessee will do anything it can not to go to trial. The state doesn't care about Tennesseans. And I guess it's a 3-year legal saga at this point. There's been a couple of appeals. I think from the state's perspective, they would say we're appealing appealable things. Any good defense attorney is going to appeal whatever they can on behalf of the client, or I guess the Attorney General's office in this case. Mm-hmm. But Willingham kind of felt like some of these appeals were in bad faith, or it was just kind of regurgitating arguments, or like really, really marginal bases.
Yeah, and that part of this made me think of, and I know both of us have covered some of the litigation around death penalty cases and things. When she had the quote about any defense attorney is going to appeal what they can, it made me think of that, because you see that a lot in those cases, right, where the defense attorneys go in, look, if there's something we can get into court on behalf of our client, we're going to do that. The difference, it seems to me, in this case is that they're doing that on behalf of the state, and the upshot of them doing that is a lack of clarity in what this law means for Tennesseans. And so it's not quite the same as just an individual that you're trying to defend, and maybe you're delaying the process, but it seems like a distinction.
Yeah. And Willingham alleged, and I wasn't able to find this in the legislative record, but she said that the bill that we discussed earlier that kind of allowed the state its latest appeal was pushed through by the Attorney General's office, and she said that members of the AG's office were going to show up to the legislative session to argue on behalf of it. But she said that, and this is what I couldn't find. I couldn't find that there was like they'd specifically mentioned this case, like while they were talking about this bill during floor sessions, but she thinks it was partly motivated by that.
Right, because they made a change to the law related to when and what you can appeal.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Otherwise, you'd have to ask for a judge's permission. But this bill granted the legal right to appeal in certain circumstances. And yeah, Willingham's thing about the members of the Attorney General's office maybe showing up to argue for the bill would just be kind of, destruction of the illusion of separation of powers between branches.
Right.
Just would be a bad look. So
when this delay came and the trial was pushed back, a lot of the women involved in this case had been already waiting quite a bit for their day in court. Do you have a sense of how that landed with them?
yeah, so what both the plaintiffs and legal team said was it was kind of this emotional whiplash. Specifically, what Alexandra, the lawyer, said was that it took some time to walk the plaintiffs through what they'd be facing in court, kind of the vulnerability of opening yourself up to telling the story of the worst day of your life and facing cross-examination from, trained lawyers. And so just kind of mentally preparing yourself to do that and then having it taken away is just really hard, is what they were saying.
Yeah. So where do we stand now? This trial, am I right that it was taken off the docket? There was going to be a bench trial. It was taken off the docket. Like where are things now and what is up ahead, if we know?
Yeah. So Willingham said that this issue to be resolved on appeal could take a year or so. It's hard to tell once it gets to the appellate level. And once it gets back to the trial court, is remanded to the trial court after this is resolved, there was one other issue that the state could possibly take up. There's a pending motion to dismiss that they could also perhaps use to delay the trial a little bit or prolong it. But at some point, it's going to have to go to trial. It's just not going to be for a little while.
And am I right to say that even the outcome of that trial could potentially then lead to further litigation?
Yeah, I believe so.
So, I mean,
yeah,
we're potentially looking at a very long scenario that I presume you may be writing more stories about.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this is my main takeaway from 8 or 9 months on the court's beat, is just how long stuff can take to resolve and how much you can tie it up for years. So,
yeah, and that there's, in every one of those cases, there's individuals, their lives are in part on hold, waiting to find out what's going to happen with this.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming and chatting with us. Like I said, as people are hearing this, it should be on our website so they can check it out. We're produced, as always, by Andrea Tudhope, and we will talk to you next week.